You're just a shallow capitalist, Fiona. Money is all you care about. That's what my father said to me. Right after the birthday party, I threw for him. A party that cost me $250,000. A party where I covered his debts, paid off my brother's second mortgage, and still gave him a speech that made him cry in front of 200 people. And his thank you. He handed me a legal document. He wanted me to sign everything my company, my shares, my life over to the family trust. Like a real daughter would, he said. So I stood there, in front of everyone smiling like I was fine. But something inside me shattered. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people you thought you were saving? Like, comment, and subscribe, because this story might just make you rethink what family really means. My name is Fiona Hayes. I'm 35 now, but back then, I was 32 CEO of a fast-growing national food brand built from scratch without a penny of help. My family, old-school intellectuals, Ivy League academics. They believed in legacy, not business. They dismissed my work as superficial, just overpriced cheese and organic bread, as my brother once joked. Still, I paid for my youngest sister's wedding. I bailed my father out of a bad investment. I covered the bills for our childhood home quietly. Because I thought, maybe if I gave enough, they'd finally respect me. But everything changed on my father's 65th birthday. The party was my idea. A luxury vineyard custom lighting a 12-piece jazz band flown in from New Orleans. I thought it would be the moment we turned the corner. Instead, it was the moment I realized they never saw me as one of them. Just a tool, a bank account, a useful fool. And what happened after that party? Well, I didn't disappear. Not right away. I planned something bigger than they could ever imagine. You don't just wake up one day and become the family scapegoat. It happens slowly over time, like erosion. When I was 11, I won my school's science fair, built a solar oven from scratch. My mom smiled, said, "That's cute," then bragged for hours about how my brother Ethan had just placed third in a Latin competition. At 15, I got my first job bagging groceries while my sister was still asking our dad to fill up her gas tank. I remember coming home late, shoes soaked with rain, and hearing my father ask, "Why are you wasting time with that kind of work? If you want to contribute, go tutor calculus." They never understood that I didn't want to be like them. I wanted to build something of my own. By 25, I had opened my first location, a boutique store in Denver, selling locally sourced artisan foods. I spent months living in the back room using shampoo samples from hotels, tracking inventory by hand at 2 a.m. When my store finally made a profit, I called my dad. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "Let me know when you publish something real." He was a retired philosophy professor, published in multiple journals. Thought capitalism was a disease. Still, he never turned down the money I quietly sent my mom to cover their property taxes. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I didn't go to Princeton like Ethan, didn't marry a poet like my sister Claire. I built a business, hired single moms, donated to food deserts. But in their eyes, that was just branding, not real virtue. And I told myself it didn't matter. I had success. A downtown apartment with brick walls and high ceilings. A team of 120 employees across 4 states. Industry interviews, podcast features. People knew my name, but the little girl inside me still held out hope that one day my family would say, "We're proud of you." That's why the birthday party meant so much to me. I wanted to prove I belonged. I hired a planner, worked with chefs, even curated the wine list myself. I made sure the speeches honored his career, his sacrifices. And when I got up to speak, I didn't mention money or success. I talked about legacy, his legacy. I saw him wiping his eyes during the last line. We owe who we are to the man who taught us to think for ourselves. Then he stood, hugged me in front of everyone, and whispered, "Follow me? There's something we need to finalize." I thought he was going to thank me, privately, maybe even say he misjudged me. Instead, he handed me a folder in a quiet room off the patio. I remember the feel of the oak table under my hand, the jazz band fading in the distance. It was a transfer agreement. He wanted me to put my entire company, valued at over $16 million, into the family trust. No compensation, no control. Just a gesture of solidarity, as the document phrased it. I stared at him. "You're serious?" He nodded. "You've made your money. Now it's time to give back. This business came from the foundation we gave you." I laughed. Out loud. "What foundation?" He looked insulted. "We raised you. We educated you. We gave you values." What he gave me was guilt, conditional love, a permanent seat at the kids' table no matter how big my name got. And I realized then this wasn't a request. It was a test, a final chance to prove I was one of them. I folded the papers, slowly slid them back into the folder, and said, "I'll think about it." I went back to the party. I smiled, toasted, posed for photos, and inside I was done. But I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. That's what they expected me to do. Instead, I played their game just long enough to plan my exit. That night, while everyone slept off the wine and speeches, I packed a single bag. I left the birthday cards unopened. The necklace my sister gave me on the bathroom counter. The keys to the family home on the nightstand. But what I took, every ounce of pain I'd swallowed for 32 years, and I used it as fuel. The next morning, I didn't just disappear, I reinvented everything, and they never saw it coming. I changed my name 2 weeks later, legally. The paperwork was simple. I chose Fiona Marin. Marin was my grandmother's maiden name, one of the few women in my family who ever ran her own business. She'd sold handmade jam from her porch in Vermont for 40 years. No degree, no validation. Just heart and hustle. I sold my company quietly through a private equity firm. No press, no parties. Just a wire transfer and an NDA. After taxes, I walked away with a little under $9 million. I didn't tell anyone. No press releases, no farewell tours. I even ghosted LinkedIn. I rented a beat-up Airstream and drove north until I hit the Oregon coast. Cannon Beach. Foggy, quiet, raw. It felt like it hadn't changed in 100 years. And for the first time in decades, I could breathe. At first, I thought I'd just lay low for a while. But healing isn't passive. It demands intention, so I got to work on me. I started therapy twice a week. Wrote pages and pages in a journal I never let anyone read. I volunteered at a women's shelter on weekends, helped them set up a food program. I learned how to paint, not for show, not for Instagram, but because it made my hands stop shaking. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was just trying to feel real. Over the next 3 years, I built a quiet little life. I bought a small, fixer-upper cottage with a garden. I got a dog. I hosted community dinners. People knew me as Fee, the woman who helped organize beach cleanups and fundraised for the local school kitchen. And slowly, I started to feel whole. But then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked among bills and art supply catalogs. No return address, just my old last name scrawled across the front, Fiona Hayes. I froze. Inside was a handwritten note from my sister Claire. "Dad's in the hospital. The trust is in shambles. Ethan's been MIA since last fall and I'm drowning. I know you hate us. But please, we need you." I stared at the paper for a long time. Not because I didn't expect it, because I did. You see, 6 months before that letter came, I'd already heard the news from someone they never suspected. Her name was Lynn. She was one of my old employees from my first store, now working in nonprofit finance. She emailed me one day saying she'd been consulting with a crumbling family trust from a prominent Denver family. As soon as she saw the names involved, she connected the dots. She didn't betray any NDAs. She didn't need to. The signs were everywhere. Bad real estate investments, lawsuits from unpaid vendors, staff resignations. Turns out, without my income funneling in the trust, had turned into a sieve. So when the letter from Claire arrived, it wasn't a shock. It was confirmation. They didn't miss me. They missed the stability I provided. Still, part of me wanted to know, were they really falling apart? I booked a flight back to Denver under an alias. Stayed at a small inn near our old neighborhood. The next day, I walked into the hospital wearing a scarf and sunglasses. And there, he was my father. Pale, hooked up to machines, eyes half closed. Claire sat by his side, rubbing his hand. Her eyes were puffy, mascara smudged. She didn't recognize me until I spoke. "You're still using the same perfume," I said softly. She turned, startled. Stood. "Fiona." I nodded. Didn't smile. Tears welled instantly. "Oh my God. I didn't think you'd come." I kept my distance. "I'm not here to fix anything." She looked down. "We don't want your money." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not what the letter said." Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a folder too familiar. "Legal documents. We want you to consider managing the trust. Restructuring it. You always knew how to build systems." I didn't take the folder. Instead, I handed her a box. Inside were sealed envelopes, letters I had written to each of them over the past 3 years. Never mailed. Until now. She opened the first, read a few lines, then looked at me. "This one's about Mom." I nodded. "Each one's about a moment, a betrayal, something you said or didn't say." I wrote them instead of screaming. Claire sat back down. "We were wrong, Fiona." I didn't reply. That night, I visited the old family home. It was quiet, smaller than I remembered. The yard unkempt, mail piled by the door. I walked away before anyone else saw me. A week later, back in Oregon, I got a call. Ethan, crying, rambling apologies, asking if he could visit. I said no. Instead, I mailed him his letter too. They all began writing back slowly, carefully. Some angry, some apologetic. None of them asking for money anymore. They were starting for the first time to listen. But then, something happened. Something I didn't expect. One visit changed everything and forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. It was a Saturday in late fall. The kind of gray, moody morning Oregon is famous for: salt in the air, the sound of gulls, the smell of wood smoke curling through the town. I was harvesting the last of my tomatoes when I heard tires crunching on gravel. A black SUV, not local. I stood, dirt on my palms, heart suddenly pounding. The door opened. Claire stepped out, hugging a shawl to her shoulders. Behind her, Ethan. My gut tightened. "I asked you not to come," I said flatly. Claire lifted her hand, not in greeting, but apology. "Please, just hear us out." I said nothing, just crossed my arms. Ethan looked older, gaunt, his confidence worn down to bare wood. "We didn't come for money." "Good," I said, "because there's none for you." He shook his head. "It's not about that. It's about Dad." Claire took a breath. "He's dying, Fiona. Days may be less. And he's asking for you. Only you." I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't show it. "Why?" He says, "He has something he needs to give you. Something he never told anyone." I didn't move, didn't blink. Because for a second, just one, I felt it again. That flicker of the little girl inside me, desperate for a real goodbye. for something human. Why should I care now? I asked. Claire's voice broke. Because he does. For the first time, he actually does. I turned my back. I wanted to scream, to throw dirt, to cry until the fog swallowed me. But I said nothing. I needed time. That night I stared at my ceiling for hours, listening to the wind, the dog breathing beside me, the clock ticking. Something inside me was unraveling, not because I still needed closure, but because I didn't want to want it. I had healed. I had survived. Why was my heart still reaching backward? And then I remembered something I had written one of the unsent letters. What I wanted most from you wasn't praise. It was presence, a moment, a truth. Maybe this was my chance, my moment. So I flew back. Not for them, not for redemption, but for myself. The hospital was quiet. ICU, machines buzzing low. The nurse at the desk looked up. "Hayes," she asked. I nodded. "Daughter." She let me in. He looked so small, smaller than I remembered. Pale skin against white sheets, lips cracked, eyes closed. I sat beside him for nearly 20 minutes before he stirred. When he opened his eyes, I didn't expect what came next. He smiled. "I knew you'd come," he rasped. I didn't respond. He reached slowly toward the nightstand, pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. "I wrote you letters," he whispered. For years, I never sent them. I didn't know how. My fingers hovered above the cover. I didn't take it. "You said I never saw you," he continued. "You were right. I didn't. I wanted to mold you into something I understood. When you didn't fit, I punished you for it." I swallowed. Why now? Because I don't want to die without trying. And because your mother knew. She told me once, "You're gonna lose her if you don't learn to listen." I couldn't hold back the tears. He coughed, his voice raspier. "I didn't come to apologize, Fiona. I came to admit that I failed you." And there it was. Not redemption, not peace, but something truer, accountability. I stood, walked to the window. "I spent years rebuilding myself from what you shattered." He nodded slowly. "And look at you. You did it." I turned, not because of you, in spite of you. He didn't argue, just held the notebook out again. This time, I took it. 2 days later, he died. And that should have been the end. But it wasn't. At the wake, a few distant relatives, old colleagues, and some remaining trust members gathered at the family house. I showed up late, wearing black hair, pinned notebook clutched in my hand. Claire was by the fireplace, talking to a man I didn't recognize. Ethan stood awkwardly near the kitchen. Then I saw her. Vivian, a name I hadn't heard in years. My father's former assistant, 20 years younger, elegant, unbothered. Always knew where the bodies were buried and how to dress the part. She stood with a drink in hand, laughing softly with one of the lawyers. Something felt wrong. I pulled Claire aside. "What is she doing here?" Claire hesitated. "She was named in the trust. We didn't know until yesterday." My stomach turned. Named how Ethan joined us. Dad changed the beneficiary 6 months ago. Gave her partial control. Said she was a steward of the vision. I laughed bitterly. So even now. He passed it on. The legacy, the control, just not to us. Claire looked broken. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about guilt. He gave it to someone who didn't make him feel ashamed. I stood frozen in that living room, the notebook heavy in my hands. Everyone around me murmuring, grieving, politicking. And I realized this was never going to be about fairness or justice. This was about release. The final break from their version of love. And it came not in the form of inheritance or apology, but in the quiet realization that I didn't need any of them to define me anymore. Not even in death. I walked out without saying goodbye. And as I left that house for the last time, I knew the real decision was still ahead. What would I do with everything I now carried? The rain was steady that night. Not violent, just constant. Oregon rain. The kind that didn't ask for attention, but still found a way into your bones. I sat in the corner of my kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, the notebook resting beside a chipped mug of herbal tea. I hadn't opened it yet, not fully. I was afraid of what I might find too little, too late, or worse, just enough to hurt again. Buck, the old retriever I'd adopted from the shelter, rested his head on my knee, his warm breath grounding me. He didn't care who I used to be, only that I fed him and let him curl against me when the wind howled. I'd built something here, a small, honest life, teaching art workshops at the community center, working part-time at the women's shelter, tending to a neighborhood garden that had once been a vacant lot full of beer cans and rusted tools. I used to think power came from legacy, from numbers, from headlines and bank accounts. Now I knew better. It came from quiet impact. From what you healed that no one applauded. From being the person you needed when no one else showed up. I finally reached for the notebook. Inside were maybe 20 pages. Some entries were dated back nearly 15 years, others more recent. The handwriting was familiar, but the voice felt foreign, hesitant, unsure. Like a man learning how to speak for the first time. You were always the brave one. That's what scared me the most. I didn't understand your fire, so I called it rebellion. I see now, it was survival. Each line cracked something open, but it didn't crush me, because by now, I had something stronger than closure. I had identity. Still, a part of me wanted to talk. Not to my father, not even to Claire or Ethan, but to someone who knew the worst of people and still chose to show up. Her name was Nora. She ran the shelter's trauma support group. A widow retired Army medic with a gravel voice and hands like she'd rebuilt her own life from cinder blocks. We met for coffee at the little bookstore cafe 2 blocks from the shelter. I handed her the notebook. He left this. I don't know if I'm supposed to feel grateful or nothing. She flipped through it, didn't read, just touched the pages, then looked up. You already did the hard part, Fiona. What was that, living well? You survived the fire and built a garden on the ashes? I blinked. She leaned forward. Forgiveness isn't about making peace with them. It's about making peace with the version of yourself that begged them to love you. I felt something shift. What if I don't forgive? I asked quietly. She smiled. Then you don't. It's not a race, but don't let their shadow steal your sunlight. That night, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, holding the first letter he ever wrote. I read it aloud. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded. Then I placed the notebook in a drawer and locked it away, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need it anymore. That part of me had been honored, witnessed, and now I could choose forward. The next morning, I drove to the garden lot. A few of the neighborhood teens were there waiting for me to teach them how to transplant seedlings. A local reporter had shown interest in covering the project, said the town needed more stories about quiet victories. I wore my overalls, hair in a braid, no makeup, and I'd never felt more like myself. Halfway through showing Aisha, a sharp-eyed 17-year-old, how to stake tomato vines, she asked, "Miss Fiona, is it true you used to be rich?" I laughed. "I used to think I was." She tilted her head. "So why aren't you anymore?" I paused, then crouched next to her. "Because I stopped paying for people to love me." She grinned. "That's baller." We both laughed. That was the moment I knew I had arrived. Not at a destination others could see, but in myself, whole, rooted. And when Claire called again the following week, this time just to talk, no requests, I picked up. Not because I owed her anything, but because I was finally choosing who had access to me. But just as I settled into this new chapter, a final twist arrived, one that would test the strength of everything I'd built. 3 weeks after Claire's unexpected softened call, a formal letter arrived postmarked from New York, heavy linen paper, gold embossed. It was from the family lawyer. Not a greeting, not an apology, a request. Due to recent instability with the trust's holdings, your input is requested at the emergency board meeting on the 14th. Attendance is crucial to prevent total dissolution of assets. It was almost laughable. After 3 years of silence, exile, and judgment, suddenly I was crucial. I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a flight, not to attend their meeting, but to make something perfectly clear. When I walked into that old conference room in Manhattan, the one where I'd once signed papers to save the family estate, every eye turned. Half shock, half hope. Even my father, pale and gaunt, looked at me like I was a ghost in heels. I didn't sit. I didn't greet. I laid one thing on the table, a stack of printed letters, the ones I'd sent months ago, the ones they never acknowledged. You didn't respond when it was personal, but now that it's financial, you remember I exist. I looked at each of them. Claire's lips trembled. Ethan stared at the table. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not here to help. I'm here to remind you I already did." Then I turned, walked out, and left them in their silence. That was the moment I felt the shift. They were the ones left begging now. Not for money, but for access. And I was no longer available. But what came after that, what truly mattered, wasn't revenge. It was the peace I found when I stopped needing any. I never rebuilt the empire. I didn't open a new business or buy back the stores I once poured my soul into. Instead, I grew tomatoes with girls who'd been told they'd never matter. I painted murals on shelter walls with women who were learning how to exist without fear. And on the anniversary of the day I walked out of that birthday party humiliated, I got a card. It was from Aisha. "Because of you, I didn't give up. You showed me what strength really looks like." I cried, then not out of pain, but release. Because the greatest revenge isn't in proving them wrong. It's in no longer needing to. I am no longer their daughter on a leash of duty and guilt. I am my own woman with boundaries, purpose, and peace. And that is enough. If you've ever been discarded by those who should have held you closest, let me remind you, you don't owe anyone your light, but you do deserve to shine. If this story resonated with you, share it, subscribe, or tell me your story, because healing begins when we're finally heard.